The house was quiet, too quiet, the kind of quiet that wraps around you like a warning. I had just stepped inside, grocery bag still in hand, keys dangling from my fingers, and called out the way I always did, Ava, I'm home. No answer. I frowned, set the bags on the counter, and walked toward the hallway. The air felt heavier than usual, like it was holding its breath. My footsteps echoed softly on the hardwood floor as I turned the corner into the living room. And that's when I saw it, a smear of red across the floor. Then more. My heart jumped into my throat as I dropped everything and sprinted forward, slipping on the tile as I rounded the next corner. And there she was, my daughter, curled on her side at the bottom of the stairs, her shirt soaked in blood, one hand barely twitching. Her lips were parted, but no sound came out. Just blood. Just silence. I collapsed beside her, cradling her head in my arms, my voice ragged and broken as I screamed, AVA, stay with me. Stay with me, baby. My hands pressed against her wound, slippery and shaking, desperate to stop what I couldn't even understand yet. My mind couldn't catch up. What happened? Who did this? Then a creak behind me, soft, slow, deliberate. I looked up and there she stood, Karen, HOA Karen, standing in the hallway with a gun dangling loosely at her side, her expression blank, almost bored. It was a warning shot, she said flatly, as if that made any sense at all. She startled me. I stared at her, my mouth open in disbelief, my entire body trembling with rage, fear, and helplessness. She was inside our home. I gasped, she's 9. She can't even walk fast. Karen shrugged. Maybe next time follow the rules. That's when I lost it. I screamed for help. I dialed 911 with shaking fingers. I yelled at her to drop the weapon. She didn't. She just stood there, watching me sob over my daughter's broken body like she'd just stepped in dog shit, and was waiting for someone to clean it up. And in that moment, as sirens began to wail in the distance, I knew this wasn't just cruelty. This was evil. And I was going to make sure the world saw her for exactly what she was. Before everything unraveled, our lives were simple in the best possible way. We had just moved into that quiet little community 2 years ago, a neighborhood lined with maple trees, well-kept lawns, and soft, golden streetlights that made the evenings feel safe and timeless. The kind of place where kids rode their bikes until dinner and neighbors smiled when they passed each other on walks. For me, it had felt like we had finally found our little corner of peace. After years of bouncing between tiny apartments and noisy city blocks, this new home felt like a dream. A fresh start. I remember the first time Ava walked through the front door, her eyes wide, her tiny fingers gripping the edge of her walker as she looked around at the empty living room and asked, "Is this all ours?" I had nodded through tears. "Yes, baby. It's all ours." She squealed with delight and immediately began mapping out where she would put her toy bins and bookshelf. That house became her sanctuary, and watching her thrive, there was the greatest joy of my life. Ava was my everything. My daughter, my light, my little miracle. She had been born with a rare motor condition that limited her mobility, but never her spirit. She walked with the help of a pink walker we decorated together with glittery stars and rainbow stickers, and she wore her braces like they were part of a superhero costume. She never let her condition define her. If anything, it gave her a kind of quiet bravery that most adults never find in their lifetimes. She was endlessly curious, always asking questions about how birds fly or why the moon followed us home at night. Her laughter could change the energy in a room, and her kindness disarmed even the grumpiest strangers in the grocery store. She loved to draw, especially hearts, animals, and family portraits where she always made sure to give me a crown. "Because you're the queen of the house," she'd say proudly, tapping the crayon to the paper. She liked the color yellow. She loved pancakes for dinner. And she adored our new house, especially the way the sunlight poured through her bedroom window every morning like a warm hug from the sky. For a while, life felt like it had finally clicked into place. Ava started at the local elementary school, which had a great special education program and teachers who truly saw her. Every morning, I'd watch her roll her walker toward the front gate, waving to classmates who had quickly come to love her bright energy. Even the principal knew her by name. After school, she'd play with sidewalk chalk in our driveway or watch squirrels from the front porch, narrating their movements like a nature show. On weekends, we baked cookies, watched Disney movies, and tried new crafts from YouTube tutorials, messy, glitter-filled afternoons that made our hearts full. I had made friends with a few moms in the area. We had coffee together during school drop-offs, exchanged recipes, even organized a small summer playgroup. Everything was finally normal, peaceful, good. Of course, there was the HOA. Like every neighborhood like ours, the homeowners association had its rules and quirks. At first, I didn't mind. We got the welcome packet, read through the guidelines about lawn maintenance, trash bin placement, and mailbox painting. It all seemed reasonable enough. I paid the dues. I attended one meeting early on just to see how things worked. That's when I first saw her, Karen. She was seated near the front of the room, clipboard in hand, a tight smile on her face. She reminded me of a librarian who didn't want to be interrupted, polished, but cold. At the time, I didn't think much of her. She raised her hand often, asked pointed questions about fence heights and landscaping borders. I assumed she was just one of those over-involved residents who took HOA rules a little too seriously. Every community has one. I didn't realize then how much power she held, or how far she was willing to go to wield it. Karen lived a few houses down. We didn't speak much. She never smiled back when Ava waved at her. Once, when Ava's chalk drawings had made it as far as the sidewalk in front of her yard, Karen appeared within minutes with a garden hose and washed it all away without a word. Ava had watched in confusion and whispered, "Did I do something wrong?" I had hugged her and said, "No, baby, some people just don't like color." We laughed about it later. I told myself not to take it personally. Karen was just stiff, uptight. Not everyone needed to be friendly. As long as she left us alone, we were fine. But peace has a way of making you forget how fragile it is. I was so focused on creating a life full of joy and safety for Ava that I didn't see the shadows growing just beyond our front door. I didn't notice how often Karen stood near her window when Ava played outside. I didn't think much about the way she walked by our driveway every morning, eyeing our property like an inspector. I missed the signs because I didn't want to believe that someone living so close could be dangerous. But I was wrong, and I learned, too late, that sometimes evil doesn't knock. Sometimes it waits silently in your own neighborhood, behind white fences and forced smiles, until the moment it decides to destroy everything. The trouble didn't start all at once. It crept in slowly, like a bad smell you can't quite place at first, just a faint whiff in the air that makes you wrinkle your nose and wonder if something's wrong. The first incident was almost laughable in hindsight. Ava had spent the afternoon drawing chalk hearts and rainbows along the edge of our driveway, adding little stars and our names underneath. It had become one of her favorite pastimes, her way of expressing joy, of literally coloring the world around her. I had just stepped outside with lemonade when I saw Karen standing at the edge of her lawn, arms crossed, eyes narrowed, her gaze locked on the drawings like they were crime scene evidence. She didn't say anything that day, just stared for a while, then turned and walked off. Later that evening, I found a note taped to our mailbox. No greeting, no name, just a printed message on HOA letterhead. Sidewalk and curb drawings must be removed within 24 hours. Please review HOA Visual Standards, Section 4B. I chuckled at first, assuming someone else on the board had sent it without realizing it was a child's artwork. But I scrubbed the chalk off anyway, not wanting to start any unnecessary trouble. Ava was disappointed, of course. "Why can't we draw happy things?" she asked. I told her we could, just maybe not right there. I didn't want her to think anyone had a problem with her. I was still giving Karen too much benefit of the doubt. The next week, it was a noise complaint. I received an email stating that a resident had expressed concern about persistent loud sounds coming from our property between 4 and 6 p.m. I read it twice, confused. Those were the hours Ava usually played outside, laughing, making up silly songs, pretending the driveway was a racetrack for her walker. She wasn't screaming or blasting music. She was just being a kid. I replied politely, asking for clarification. The HOA manager wrote back that several residents had noticed the disruption and asked that we keep playtime at a reasonable volume. It felt like a slap, one disguised in politeness. Ava started asking if she should stop singing while she played. That broke me a little. I told her she could sing as loud as she wanted, but I also started keeping her windows closed. Then came the landscaping violation. Karen reported us for having non-uniform ground cover near our side gate. I had planted a few flowers there, nothing wild, just some marigolds and lavender in a small pot arrangement. Ava had helped me with it, proudly scooping the soil with her little plastic trowel. We'd even named the plants. But according to Karen's report, they were an unauthorized alteration to common visibility zones. I was fined $50 and told to remove them immediately. I appealed it, explaining that it was a private spot and didn't obstruct anything. But the board, which Karen sat on, denied the appeal. The flowers had to go. Ava cried when she saw the empty spot. Why does she hate everything I love? She asked. I didn't have an answer. I just hugged her. It didn't take long before the tension became routine. Karen's face appeared more often, watching from her porch when Ava played, walking her dog just a little too close to our yard, lingering near our mailbox like she was waiting for something. One day, I caught her photographing our trash bins. When I asked her what she was doing, she said calmly, just making sure everyone's following protocol. I wanted to snap, but I bit my tongue. I kept telling myself to rise above, to take the high road. But the high road gets lonely when your child starts flinching every time she sees your neighbor walk by. The worst part was how normalized it started to feel. Like every little piece of joy had to be double-checked. If Ava wanted to hang wind chimes on her bedroom window, I hesitated. If I parked slightly to the left on our driveway, I triple-checked to make sure it wouldn't violate HOA vehicle alignment codes. I was walking on eggshells in a place that was supposed to be our refuge. And the other neighbors? Most of them stayed silent. A few offered sympathetic glances, but no one said anything out loud. I started wondering if they were scared of her too, or if they simply agreed with her in quiet, invisible ways. Then came the incident that truly shifted everything. Ava had been playing with a bubble wand on our front lawn. It was sunny, and her giggles filled the air as she chased the bubbles with delight, each one catching the sunlight like a floating jewel. I stepped inside to grab her water bottle, and when I came back out less than a minute later, I found her standing frozen, walker still, eyes wide and scared. Karen was leaning over her, speaking in a low, harsh tone. This isn't a playground. This is a community. People don't want to hear you screeching all afternoon. Ava didn't speak. She just looked at me, tears in her eyes, the wand slipping from her fingers. I stormed over, asking what the hell Karen thought she was doing. She straightened, looked me in the eyes, and said, just reminding her to respect the peace. That's what the HOA is for. I told her if she ever spoke to my daughter like that again, she'd regret it. She just smiled and said, you're free to file a complaint, but you might want to read the bylaws first. That night, I couldn't sleep. Something about her tone, her total lack of remorse, terrified me more than anything else. She wasn't just being difficult. She enjoyed this. She wanted us gone. I filed multiple complaints with the HOA, documenting every interaction. I kept a log. I installed a security camera above our front door. But nothing came of it. Every complaint was under review. Every email was received and noted. Karen, meanwhile, continued to walk through the neighborhood like she owned it, clipboard in hand, like a sheriff in a Western film, looking for the next family to harass. But she had already found her target, and I began to realize, slowly and painfully, that this wasn't about rules. This wasn't about noise or flowers or trash bins. This was personal. She had decided that we didn't belong there. And once someone like Karen decides that, you're never really safe again. At first, I thought we had seen the worst of it. The citations, the stares, the thinly veiled comments. All of it felt like an ongoing storm that, with time, might pass. But it didn't. It got worse. Much worse. Karen stopped hiding her disdain and started making it her mission to remind us we weren't welcome, not just through letters or official channels, but with her presence. Her shadow stretched across our days. She began showing up wherever we went. At first, it was subtle. I'd take Ava to the little neighborhood park, and minutes later, Karen would arrive, walking slowly along the edge, pretending to be on a phone call or inspecting the trees. But she never brought her dog. She didn't speak to anyone. She just stood there, arms crossed, watching us, every move we made. At first, I tried to rationalize it. Maybe she had errands nearby or just liked to walk there. But then I started seeing her car parked near the school when I picked Ava up. She had no children, no relatives there. Yet she always seemed to appear as Ava rolled out of the front gates. Ava noticed it too. "Why does she follow us, Mom?" she asked one afternoon, her voice small. I didn't know what to say. I told her Karen probably just lived nearby. But Ava didn't buy it. She was only 9, but she wasn't naive. She could feel the fear, just like I could. One evening, Ava came inside, visibly shaken. She had been playing outside when she noticed Karen across the street, holding up her phone, filming, not just filming the street or her surroundings, but clearly focused on our yard. Ava said Karen muttered something before walking away. When I checked the footage from our doorbell camera, I saw it too. Karen walking slowly past, pointing her phone directly at our window, then turning with the faintest smirk. I reported it again. I forwarded the footage to the HOA and the local precinct. The HOA responded with a canned message. "While we understand your concern, recording in public areas is not prohibited under current bylaws." That's when I realized we were truly alone. The HOA was not neutral. They were protecting her either out of fear or loyalty or something more sinister. And that feeling, that realization, settled in my chest like a brick. No one was going to help us. No one was going to stop her. The stress began affecting everything. I stopped sleeping. Ava started having stomach aches in the mornings and begged me not to make her go outside. Her sparkle dimmed. Her bubbly energy gave way to caution and nervous glances. She started double-checking that the doors were locked, something no child should ever have to think about. Even inside our home, we didn't feel safe anymore. Karen began leaving things near our door, random, ambiguous items that were never threatening enough to be reported as a crime, but just unsettling enough to feel deliberate. One morning, it was a stack of printed HOA bylaws highlighted in yellow. Another time, it was a child's toy, an old cracked doll, propped against our mailbox with a sticky note that read, "This doesn't belong here." I knew she was trying to break us down, to push us out without ever saying the words. And still, the HOA refused to act. Every complaint I filed was in review. Every time I asked for a board meeting to discuss the harassment, they told me the agenda was full or that they'd circle back. Meanwhile, Karen continued to walk the neighborhood like a patrolling officer, clipboard in hand, always watching. The psychological warfare was constant. It was designed to wear me down, and in some ways it was working. I began jumping every time the doorbell rang. I stopped sitting on the front porch with Ava. We started keeping the blinds closed, even during the day. We were retreating, shrinking ourselves inside our own home. And she knew it. I could see the satisfaction on her face whenever we passed each other in the street. That quiet, smug look that said, "I'm winning." Then came the night that truly broke me. Ava had gone to bed early. She hadn't been feeling well, and I was in the kitchen finishing the dishes when I heard a faint tapping sound. Not a knock. A tap, repeated, methodical. I turned off the faucet and listened. There it was again, coming from the back window. I moved slowly, my heart pounding, and peered through the curtain. At first, I saw nothing, just the yard dark and still. But then a shadow moved. A figure stepped away from the edge of the house, walking casually down the side path, disappearing into the dark. I couldn't see her face, but I didn't need to. I knew who it was. Karen. No, one else walked that slowly, that confidently, in the middle of the night behind someone else's house. I called the police immediately. They arrived 15 minutes later, took a report, walked the property, and found nothing. Could have been a misunderstanding, the officer said. Might be worth installing more lighting. He was polite but dismissive. Another system brushing us aside. I broke down that night, sat on the floor of the kitchen, and cried harder than I had in years. Not just from fear, but from exhaustion, from the realization that I had done everything I could to play by the rules, and still, this was happening. I had followed every HOA guideline, submitted every complaint, documented everything, and yet none of it mattered. Karen had found a way to torment us without ever laying a finger on us. She had turned our safe haven into a pressure cooker, and it was working. I started keeping a journal documenting every interaction, no matter how small. I wrote down the time, date, what she said, what she did. I compiled emails, took photos, backed up security footage. I was building a case, not because I thought it would protect us, but because deep down, I had a horrible feeling. A voice inside me that whispered, something worse is coming. Karen was escalating. Her behavior was becoming bolder, more invasive, more unpredictable. And when someone who thrives on control starts feeling unchecked, they don't stop. They act. And I knew, sooner or later, Karen would cross a line she couldn't come back from. And when she did, I could only pray it wouldn't be too late. It was a Wednesday, quiet, overcast, one of those oddly still afternoons where everything feels too calm, like the world is holding its breath before something breaks. I had picked up Ava early from school that day because she'd had a mild headache. Nothing serious, the nurse said, probably just exhaustion or nerves. Nerves, something she had too much of lately. Thanks to the constant pressure of living under Karen's silent, ever-watching shadow, I let her nap in her room while I went out to grab her favorite soup from the deli down the street. It wasn't even a 15-minute errand. The store was empty, the drive home uneventful. When I pulled into the driveway, everything looked exactly as it always did. Our front porch, the welcome mat, Ava's little flower pots lined up in a row. Nothing seemed out of place. But the moment I opened the front door, I felt at that wrongness. The air inside the house was cold, heavy, unnatural, like the air right before a storm, thick with pressure, except this wasn't the weather. It was something else. I set the soup down on the hallway table and called out, Ava? No answer. Honey, I'm back. I got the tomato bisque you like. Still silence. I walked toward her room, noticing how the stillness seemed to press in tighter with every step. And then I saw it, just a few small drops of something dark smeared across the tile floor. I froze. I stared at the stains, my brain refusing to accept what it was seeing. It wasn't paint. It wasn't juice. It was blood. Ava? I called again, louder now, panic creeping into my voice. I turned the corner toward the stairs, and that's when my world shattered. She was lying halfway down the bottom steps, curled on her side, a pool of red spreading out beneath her. Her walker was toppled beside her, one of the wheels still spinning slightly, as if frozen mid-motion. Her eyes were open but unfocused, her lips moving ever so slightly, though no sound came out. I dropped to my knees, so fast I bruised them on the tile, clutching her face, screaming her name. Ava! Ava, baby, stay with me. Can you hear me? Look at me. My hands pressed down on her torso, desperate to stop the bleeding, but it just kept coming. Her shirt, light pink with little cats on it, was soaked in dark crimson. My voice cracked as I reached for my phone with shaking fingers and dialed 911. My daughter, she's been shot. I think there's blood. She's not. Oh my God, please send someone, please. My baby, she's not, please. I could barely form sentences, the words tumbling out of me in a scream. And then from behind me came the click, a soft, mechanical sound that made my blood run cold. I turned, still kneeling, and there she was, Karen, standing at the end of the hallway, inside my house, holding a gun in her right hand. Her expression was terrifying in its calmness. No rage, no regret, just cold detachment. She startled me. She said, her voice completely flat, I thought someone had broken in. I stared at her, trying to process what she had just said, trying to understand how any of this could make sense. You shot her. I screamed, my voice shaking the walls. You shot my daughter? She lives here. She's 9. Karen's hand didn't waver. She was in the hallway. I didn't recognize her. I panicked. It was just a warning shot. A warning shot? A child bleeding out was a consequence of a warning shot? My hands were still pressed to Ava's body, and I could feel the faint thrum of her pulse beneath them. Fading. Weak. I screamed again, "Get out! Get out!" But Karen didn't move. She stood there like a statue, her pale blue eyes locked on me, gun still at her side. And then, as if she were commenting on the weather, she said, "You never belonged here. This isn't a place for people like you." I couldn't breathe. I couldn't think. All I knew was that I had to keep Ava alive. I dragged myself toward the front door, screaming for help at the top of my lungs, hoping, praying that a neighbor would hear me. I ran back in, grabbed towels from the kitchen, and pressed them into Ava's wound. "Stay with me, baby. Please don't go. Please." Her eyes fluttered slightly, her fingers twitching. That tiny motion gave me just enough hope to keep going. The sirens finally came, wailing through the still afternoon like salvation itself. Red and blue lights flooded the windows, and I ran to unlock the front door, yelling, "She's in here! She's dying! He's still inside!" Karen hadn't moved. When the officers came in with weapons drawn, she finally dropped the gun, placing it gently on the floor like it was a fragile heirloom. "I warned them," she said softly, as if that explained anything. "I filed reports. I asked for action. No one listened." The officers shouted for me to back away as paramedics rushed in. They surrounded Ava in a blur of uniforms, voices barking out vitals and medical codes. Gunshot wound to the abdomen, weak pulse, initiating fluids, apply pressure, get her out, go. They carried her out on a stretcher, her small body almost disappearing beneath the layers of gauze and wires. I tried to climb into the ambulance with her, but they told me to ride separately. They needed space to work. I sat in the back of a police cruiser, hands covered in my child's blood, staring blankly out the window as Karen was placed in handcuffs and led to a separate vehicle. As they walked her past me, she glanced sideways and whispered she shouldn't have been there. It took every ounce of self-control not to lunge at her, not to tear her apart with my bare hands, but I had to be strong. For Ava. At the hospital, everything moved in chaos. Doctors and nurses swarmed. I was left in a cold waiting room with a security officer posted near the entrance. A detective came in a few hours later, Detective Marissa James. She was calm, kind, methodical. She listened as I told her everything: Karen's harassment, the stalking, the footage, the reports I had filed. I showed her emails. I gave her copies of everything I had been documenting. She nodded and said, "We'll get the truth. I promise." I broke down then, not because I believed in promises, but because someone finally seemed to see us. Like, maybe, finally, we weren't invisible anymore. The surgery lasted hours. I paced the hallway until my feet ached, praying to every power I could think of. When the doctor finally came out and said, "She's stable," I collapsed into a chair, sobbing so hard I couldn't see straight. Stable. Not safe. Not healed. But alive. My baby was alive. And Karen? She had been booked, but not held. Somehow, despite shooting a child, she was released on bail later that night. That's when the second wave of rage hit me. How? How was this possible? How could someone walk into our home, shoot my daughter, and sleep in her own bed that same night? But that's the thing about injustice. It doesn't always look like evil. Sometimes it's dressed in beige cardigans and homeowner policies. Sometimes it knows the system better than you do. But what Karen didn't know, what she never could have imagined, was that I was done being silent. That bullet didn't just pierce my daughter's body. It lit a fire in my soul that would never go out. She had started something she couldn't finish. And from that day forward, I swore I would drag the truth out into the light if it was the last thing I did. Because no one hurts my child and walks away. Not in this life. Not while I'm still breathing. Tools, the hospital smelled like antiseptic and despair. The hallways echoed with hurried footsteps and muffled voices, and every beep from a nearby monitor made my heart race. I sat beside Ava's bed, gripping her small hand, which was connected to an IV tube, her skin pale against the crisp white sheets. The doctors had removed the bullet, but the internal bleeding had taken its toll. They said she was lucky. Lucky, as if a child surviving a gunshot wound in her own home at the hands of a neighbor was something to be grateful for. I couldn't bring myself to sleep. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw her lying at the foot of the stairs, blood pooling around her like ink. I heard the soft, lifeless words from Karen's mouth. It was just a warning shot. I felt the helpless rage rise again and again. My daughter, my sweet, gentle, defenseless Ava had nearly died, and her shooter had walked free just hours later. The injustice of it threatened to consume me. My phone buzzed constantly, messages from family, a few kind neighbors, and then the news. Headlines spun from early reports. Child injured in HOA dispute, homeowner fires weapon after mistaken intrusion. Mistaken intrusion? My hands shook as I read it. Karen had told police Ava entered her unit uninvited, that she feared for her safety, that she had acted to protect herself. She didn't mention that it was our home. She didn't mention the stalking, the threats, the harassment. She had twisted the story into a narrative of victimhood, hers. I felt sick. I called the detective, left voicemails, demanded to know why she was out on bail. It's being reviewed, they told me. The DA is looking at all evidence. These things take time. Time. Meanwhile, my daughter lay in a hospital bed, unable to eat without vomiting, flinching every time a nurse entered the room. Meanwhile, Karen was probably sipping coffee on her porch, already rewriting history in that cold, bureaucratic voice of hers. The rage inside me needed somewhere to go, and so I did the only thing I could. I got up, I got dressed, and I drove to her house. I didn't have a plan, just a need to see her, to face the monster who nearly took my daughter from me. I parked across the street and walked up to her perfectly trimmed lawn, heart pounding. Her porch light was on. I rang the doorbell, and when the door creaked open, there she was, Karen, still composed, still smug. She raised an eyebrow, as if I were a solicitor selling magazines. "What do you want?" she asked flatly. I didn't speak at first. I just looked at her, looked at the woman who had tormented us for months, who had filed reports over sidewalk chalk and singing, who had watched us through windows and circled our house like a predator, and who had, in cold blood, pulled a trigger. Finally, I said, "You shot my daughter." She didn't flinch. I told the police everything. It was an unfortunate mistake. I stepped forward. She was in our house. You knew that. You've been watching us for months. You've been trying to push us out since the day we moved in. Karen folded her arms. This isn't about her. This is about you. About people like you who think rules don't apply to them. My fists clenched. People like me? What does that mean, Karen? Her lips curled slightly. You don't belong here. You never did. I tried to keep this community safe. Your daughter? Wandering around unattended? It was bound to happen. I was shaking from the fury rising up in my throat, from the surreal horror of hearing her say the quiet part out loud. You nearly killed a child, and you're still trying to make it sound justified? She didn't respond. She didn't have to. That silence, that smirk, said everything. She felt untouchable. She was untouchable, at least for now. I backed away slowly, keeping my eyes on hers. You're going to pay for this, I said quietly. You may have the HOA behind you. You may have fooled the police for now, but the truth is coming. And when it does, you won't be able to hide behind your little rules anymore. I walked back to my car without waiting for an answer. She didn't close the door. She just watched me leave, like she was already plotting her next move. But this time I was plotting mine too. I drove straight to the precinct and demanded to speak to the detective again. I handed over every file I had, emails, photos, the footage from our camera, audio recordings of her stalking Ava's school. The detective took it all. She looked overwhelmed, but serious. This is a lot, she said. but it's good. It helps. That wasn't enough for me. I wanted charges. I wanted her arrested again. I wanted the world to see her for who she was. So I started reaching out to the press. I wrote our story down and sent it to every news contact I could find. I posted to social media. I told the truth, raw and unfiltered, about Ava, about the harassment, about the gun. And people started listening. But none of that changed the fact that my daughter still had to heal, that every day in the hospital she grew quieter, that she flinched whenever someone knocked on the door, that she asked in a whisper one night, "Am I going to die?" I held her and told her no. I told her she was stronger than anyone I knew. I told her she was brave, and inside I made a promise to myself, a quiet, burning vow, that I wouldn't let this get buried. Karen wanted us gone, erased, invisible. But I was going to do the opposite. I was going to make sure the whole world saw what she did. This was no longer just a fight for justice. It was a fight for truth, for my daughter's voice, for every family who had ever been made to feel powerless in their own home. Karen thought she could win by pulling a trigger and hiding behind bylaws. But she underestimated something. She underestimated a mother's rage. And now, she had no idea what was coming. The days that followed were a blur of hospital visits, legal calls, and cold coffee cups left half-sipped on waiting room tables. Ava's recovery was slow, but steady. She could sit up with help. Her voice, though faint, had returned. Every time I heard it, I wanted to cry. Not just from relief, but from the simmering fury that someone like Karen had come this close to stealing it. But I didn't have time to fall apart. Not yet, because while Ava healed, I had work to do. The first crack in Karen's story came from a neighbor, a teenage girl named Danny who lived across the street and often sat on her balcony to study. She reached out to me, quietly one afternoon, her voice trembling. "I think I saw something," she said, and I recorded part of it. My heart jumped. I met her at her house, and she played back a video on her phone. The footage was blurry and distant, but unmistakable. Karen entering our property from the side gate, holding a dark object in her hand, looking around like she was making sure no one was watching. This was before the shooting, before Ava ever moved from a room. I stared at that clip like it was a piece of my soul coming back together. "Please," I asked, "can you send that to the police?" She nodded. "Already did." From that point, everything accelerated. Detective Marissa called me in the next day. She looked more focused than ever. "We've received several new statements," she said, "and that video helped. But it gets better. Do you remember Mr. Lin?" I blinked. Mr. Lin was an elderly man who lived 3 houses down, barely spoke to anyone, and mostly stayed inside. He has cameras facing the street and partially angled toward your home. He's been using them for birdwatching, but he caught everything. She paused, then added, including audio. My breath caught. I followed her into the station's AV room, where a technician had compiled the footage. And there it was, clear as day. Karen entering the side gate, walking calmly to our back door, letting herself inside with gloves on. A few minutes of stillness, then movement down the hallway. The moment Ava stepped into view, Karen raising her arm, the sound of the gun, Ava collapsing, and then, coldly, chillingly, Karen saying to herself, "That'll teach them." I gasped. I clutched the chair. I felt like I was going to throw up. But I kept watching. Because I had to. Because now the truth had a voice. And it was louder than any HOA bylaw. Detective Marissa paused the video. "This changes everything. This wasn't fear. This wasn't self-defense. This was planned." She stood, her jaw tight. "We're filing to revoke her bail immediately. And she'll be facing additional charges, breaking and entering, premeditated assault with a deadly weapon, child endangerment, possibly even attempted murder." The words echoed in my ears like music, not because any of it could undo what had happened to Ava, but because for the first time since this nightmare began, it felt like the scales were tipping toward justice. Karen had lied. To the police. To the board. To the community. And now there was proof. The moment news of the footage broke, everything shifted. Local media picked it up within hours. The headline on the evening broadcast was unforgiving. HOA member caught on tape entering home before shooting child. My phone exploded. Reporters, neighbors, advocacy groups. Karen's version of events unraveled in real time. The so-called self-defense angle collapsed under the weight of the facts. More witnesses came forward, emboldened by the footage. One neighbor said she had heard Karen bragging about how people like them won't last long here. Another admitted she had been afraid to speak out earlier but had often seen Karen watching Ava from her porch. With this weird intensity, the picture became crystal clear. This wasn't a one-time mistake. It was a campaign of harassment that escalated into violence. And the HOA? Suddenly, they had a lot to answer for. I received a formal email from the HOA board. It was filled with legal jargon and weak regret. We are shocked and deeply saddened by recent revelations. The HOA board had no knowledge of Ms. Wells, Karen's intentions, and will be conducting an internal review of all previous complaints. Internal review. I nearly laughed. I had been begging for one for months. The same people who ignored my cries for help were now panicking, distancing themselves, issuing press statements, pretending they hadn't been complicit. But they were. Every ignored email, every brushed-off meeting, every time they said, "Let's not escalate things," they had given her room to grow bolder. Karen was rearrested within 48 hours. The judge this time refused bail. The footage had changed everything. I was present in the courtroom when it was shown during the hearing. She sat there dressed in beige, hands folded, expression blank. But when her own voice echoed in the courtroom, "That'll teach them," even her attorney looked uncomfortable. The courtroom was silent. The judge's voice was stern. "You are a danger to this community. You will remain in custody until trial." I felt something crack open inside me, a dam that had been holding back weeks of helpless rage and pain. For the first time, I saw her handcuffed and led out of the room, not as a woman misusing power, but as the criminal she was. The investigation continued, but the reveal was done. The lie had been exposed, and slowly, the community began to turn. People who had once looked away now offered apologies. Some sent flowers to the hospital. Some asked if they could testify. And some, though not many, admitted they had once believed Karen, that she had seemed so reasonable, that they had thought I was overreacting, that perhaps the issue had been blown out of proportion, but now they knew better. Now they saw. Ava didn't have to speak a word. Her pain, her scar, her survival was a louder truth than any of Karen's carefully crafted stories. And in that truth, something powerful was born. Not just the beginning of justice, but the end of silence. The moment the footage was released to the public, everything that had been hidden in the shadows burst into the light. It wasn't just a local news story anymore. It was everywhere. National outlets picked it up. Major networks ran headlines like HOA board member caught on camera shooting disabled child in her own home. The footage of Karen entering our property, unprovoked, armed, and calm before firing on my daughter, it spread like wildfire. The video wasn't just evidence, it was undeniable visceral truth. No more twisting narratives, no more hiding behind bylaws. The world finally saw what I had been screaming about for months. And they were horrified. The public outcry was immediate and massive. Protests began outside the HOA office. Residents of our own neighborhood, once silent, joined in. Some held signs with Ava's name. Others simply wrote, "We believe her." One elderly couple who had lived on our street for 20 years stood side by side with handmade posters that said, "Not in our name, not in our neighborhood." The pressure was too much for the board to withstand. Within a week, 3 members of the HOA, including the president, resigned. Their exit statements were filled with vague apologies and statements like, "We were misled by Karen's record, and we deeply regret the failure to act sooner." But it was too little, too late. Their complicity had enabled Karen's escalation, and the community knew it. People began sharing their own stories. Residents from other neighborhoods, from other states, victims of HOA abuse who had never spoken up before. Stories of power misused, of silence enforced by fear. What happened to Ava became a symbol, not just of injustice, but of what happens when we allow people to weaponize control under the guise of community standards. My inbox overflowed with thousands of messages from parents, teachers, even former HOA board members who had seen similar behavior and done nothing. Your story gave me the courage to speak, one email said. Your daughter is a hero, said another. Meanwhile, Karen's charges continued to mount. The district attorney's office filed an official motion to add a hate crime enhancement, citing her history of targeted harassment, her statements caught on security footage, and the deeply personal nature of her attack. She now faced multiple felony charges: attempted murder, assault with a deadly weapon, unlawful entry, and child endangerment. At the next court hearing, the judge spoke firmly. This case represents one of the clearest examples of targeted aggression I have seen in my years on the bench. Karen sat motionless as her lawyer tried to argue mental distress, but the courtroom didn't buy it. The evidence was too damning. The calm deliberation in her actions too clear. She wasn't panicked. She wasn't afraid. She was empowered until she wasn't. What surprised me most was how the community began to rebuild itself from the inside. People who once stayed silent began checking in on Ava. They sent cards, meals, even books to keep her company during recovery. A few children wrote her letters that still make me cry. I used to be scared of talking, but you helped me be brave. One said, the local school renamed their spring fundraiser in her honor, Ava's Day of Hope, raising awareness for kids with disabilities and inclusive neighborhood safety policies. Our story sparked town hall meetings and policy reforms. Several local officials proposed new legislation aimed at increasing oversight over HOA authority and protecting residents from unchecked board power. It wasn't just about Karen anymore. It was about making sure there would never be another Ava. Through it all, Ava remained stronger than anyone expected. She still asked questions, still had nightmares, but she smiled more now. She laughed, even if only for moments. When she learned Karen had been denied bail permanently, she looked up at me and said, "So she can't hurt anybody else now?" I nodded. "No, sweetheart, she can't." And she whispered, "Good." That moment meant more to me than any headline or courtroom win. It was the beginning of closure, not just for Ava, but for all of us. Justice isn't always clean or quick. It's not always enough. It doesn't erase trauma or heal every wound. But sometimes justice is knowing the world finally sees the truth, and that the person who thought they could silence you now has to answer for everything they tried to hide. Karen thought she could erase us. Instead, she made us louder. She made Ava a symbol of something she never imagined: courage, survival, and the power of a voice that refuses to be silenced. In the quiet months that followed the trial, something remarkable began to happen. We started to breathe again. Not deeply, not easily, and not all at once. But slowly, breath by breath, Ava and I began to find pieces of ourselves that we thought had been lost in the blood, the courtrooms, and the headlines. Her wounds healed first. The doctors said she was lucky the bullet hadn't damaged anything irreparable, but I knew better. I saw the damage in the way she tensed every time the doorbell rang. I saw it in how she scanned a room before entering, in how she gripped my hand tighter when we walked through crowded spaces. But I also saw something else: strength, a quiet, growing resilience that bloomed not in defiance, but in peace. Her body was healing, yes, but so was her spirit. She started drawing again, at first only in black and white, but then one day she asked me for the yellow marker. "I want to draw the sun," she said softly, and I had to turn away before she saw my tears. We moved, not far, but far enough to start over. A modest home on a quieter street with wide windows and no HOA. Our new neighbors brought us brownies and asked if we needed help unloading boxes. No one asked about Ava's walker. No one stared. They just welcomed us, like we were ordinary, like we belonged. And for the first time in a long while, that didn't feel like something we had to fight for. Ava's new room had sunlight all day. and she filled it with stuffed animals and stars painted on the walls. The first time she slept through the night again, I stayed up just to watch her breathe, whispering silent thanks to a god I wasn't sure I still believed in, but hoped was listening. People started asking me to speak. Schools, support groups, advocacy panels. At first, I said no. I didn't want to relive it. But then one night, Ava said, maybe if you tell people, they won't be so afraid anymore. And so I did. I stood in rooms full of strangers and told them about the sidewalk chalk, the HOA notices, the gun, and the blood. I told them about a little girl who just wanted to sing and draw hearts, and how the world tried to silence her. And I told them how she survived anyway. Every time I spoke, someone came up afterward and said, that happened to me too, or I thought I was the only one, and I realized Ava wasn't just healing, she was helping others heal too. Karen's name stopped being the center of the story. Instead, people asked about Ava, how she was doing, what she was drawing, what she wanted to be when she grew up. Her answer changed weekly: astronaut, artist, teacher. Sometimes she still asks me if she's safe, and I don't lie. I tell her the truth, that bad people exist, but so do good ones, and that no matter what, I will always protect her. And now, we are surrounded by people who will too. The light is returning to her eyes. The laughter is coming back into our home. And when I hear her singing to herself in the next room, off-key, too loud, and perfectly Ava, I know we are not just surviving anymore. We are living and healing together. When I look back now, it's still hard to believe it all actually happened. That a neighbor, a woman trusted with responsibility, given authority under the name of community, could take it so far. That she could invade our home, aim a weapon, and nearly take my daughter's life, and that for a time, people believed her. But that's what makes stories like ours both terrifying and necessary. Because it's easy to pretend that people like Karen don't exist. It's easy to believe HOA problems are just petty squabbles or minor annoyances. Until they're not. Until the quiet harassment becomes public danger. Until someone bleeds. Until someone almost dies. What happened to us wasn't just a tragedy, it was a warning. And if I had stayed silent, if I had let fear win, Karen would have done it again. Maybe not to us. Maybe to someone else. Someone who couldn't fight back. But we didn't stay silent. And now, the whole world knows what she did. This story is more than personal, it's a mirror. Because too many people are living like we did, afraid in their own homes, walking on eggshells around a neighbor who weaponizes rules and hides behind policy. If that's you, if you've ever been targeted, harassed, followed, or silenced in the place you're supposed to feel safest, please listen to me. You are not alone. You're not exaggerating. You're not too sensitive. You're not causing drama. You're living through something real, and your voice deserves to be heard. We tell these stories not for sympathy, but for solidarity. Because the more we speak, the more we reveal. And the more we reveal, the less space there is for this kind of abuse to exist. So here's what I ask. Don't just watch this video, be part of it. Backhand index pointing right, like this video, if you've ever felt unsafe because of someone who held power over you. Backhand index pointing right, comment below, and share your story. Whether it's about an HOA, a landlord, or a neighbor who crossed the line, backhand index pointing right, subscribe to this channel so you never miss another real story that exposes what too many are afraid to say. Backhand index pointing right, and most of all, share this. Let someone else feel seen. Let someone else know they're not crazy. They're not alone. Because silence protects the predator. But truth protects the rest of us. This was our story. This is HOA Karen Shorts, and we won't stop until every voice is heard.